Hello everyone, it's Shocktober, Chucky Part 2. Yesterday I talked about Curse of Chucky, which is on Netflix. And now we're going to talk about Cult of Chucky, which is also on Netflix. Just dropped like earlier this month as I'm recording this. And as you know, if you listened, I really liked Curse of Chucky. And I'll just get this out of the way and say I also really liked Cult of Chucky. Now, what Curse did was bring the series back to its roots with sticking to the horror, keeping things a little bit of a mystery, introduce some great characters and a great new storyline. And Cult of Chucky builds on that. So at the end of Curse of Chucky, you got the main character going into a mental institution. You got her niece was supposedly how Chucky's always trying to swap his soul with somebody. Supposedly that was done. And at the end of Curse of Chucky, he shows up at Andy's house. Andy from the first movie, the little boy who is now grown, and he gets his head blown off. And this movie starts with like Andy out on a date, and he's like, trying to meet this girl, but she Googled him, and she's like, oh, you got a lot of baggage or whatever, so she doesn't want anything to do with it. So he's like, yeah, I figured, and that's just kind of how these things go. So, he goes back home, and they show that he still has the Chucky head just like all fucked up and deformed, and he basically just tortures it for fun. And it's a really great opening. Andy is not used enough in this movie, which is kind of the biggest letdown. But so the main character from Curse of Chucky, I wish I had her name, but it's Brad Dourif's daughter. She is in a mental institution. She got blamed for all the murders of her family, because Curse of Chucky has a really dark ending. Like, our main character gets framed for murder, Chucky gets away, and he basically kills her niece, which we find out in this. So this is one's kind of hard to talk about without spoilers, so I'll try to get as much in as I can. But let's first read the synopsis. I have it pulled up here. It says, Chucky returns to terrorize his human victim, Nica. That's the main character's name, Nica, who is confined to an asylum for the criminally insane. Meanwhile, the killer doll has some scores to settle with his old enemies with the help of his former wife. So yeah, Jennifer Tilly makes an appearance. I think she made a small appearance in Curse of Chucky. I think at the very end, and she's kind of like sprinkled throughout this movie. But we're introduced to a bunch of characters who have encountered Chucky throughout the years in some way, and they're all going through therapy, and they're trying to show that, like, hey, this is not real. Like, there's no such thing as a killer doll and all this business. And one of the guys has like multiple personalities, and one woman, like, so they have a Chucky doll there as like part of their therapy, and she believes it's like her real baby, and she carries him around as if he's her real baby. The gimmick with this movie, okay, so this is where we're gonna get into spoilers. It's really hard to talk about this movie without doing it, but in this movie there are multiple Chuckies. What we find out, so at the end of Curse of Chucky, it was kind of confusing, where he seems to be doing the soul swap on the little girl, but then he shows up at Andy's house as a doll, and so it's kind of like, what the fuck is going on with that? What we find out is, instead of swapping souls, he can actually replicate his soul, and it goes into the other body. So Chucky actually replicates himself into multiple good guy dolls and into multiple people. And there's actually an implication that happens with Jennifer Tilly as well. But so that's kind of what's going on here. That's why they call it Cult of Chucky, which cult is kind of a misleading name. They call it a cult, but it's not really a cult. It's just, hey, there's multiple Chuckies going on. So Nica suspects that these good guy dolls are all evil and realistic and blah blah blah, and or real, I should say, not realistic. But it's kind of true, kind of not. I will say I didn't like this one as much as Curse, because I still think it's a 4 out of 5, but to me this one's a 4 out of 5 because it loses a little bit of the horror. Like, it does a good job in the beginning, but then eventually it does become more slapsticky, kind of the way the older ones were, like Bride and Seed. But this one does have a lot of creative kills. Maybe some bad CGI with some of those kills, but for the most part, all the kills are really great. Really gory, really graphic. Like, maybe some of the more gory kills than there's ever been in a Chucky movie, but there's not as many kills. It's just the ones they do are like really out there. Like a girl strapped to a table, and he throws a thing in a glass, and it falls down and cuts her head off and cuts up her body and shit. And a guy getting like drilled through the back of the head and stuff like that. Like there's a lot of really good kills, and they like linger on the gore long enough that you need. But like this movie just has a lot of nice character work. Like Nica, the actress who plays her, Brad Dourif's daughter, is really great in this movie, and she was great in the last movie, so that kind of carries over. There's a lot of really great funny moments in this one. Like, so they're in, the Chucky doll gets delivered, and there's this one character who's crazy. She's like an older woman who walks around like, can you see me? And everybody's like, yeah, I can see you. And she's like, oh, good. Like, she's afraid that people can't see her. And so, like, when Chucky finally comes alive, he's, like, walking by, and she's like, can you see me? And he's just like, yeah, I can see you. And she's like, oh. And he's like, do you see me? And she's like, yeah. He's like, I'm a fucking doll. Like, why aren't you freaking out? And she's like, oh, because you're not real. And he basically just has a debate with this crazy woman. And he's like, well, you're fucking, he's like, you know what? When I'm done here, I'm going to come back and I'm going to take care of you because fuck you. And it's kind of a funny, fucking silly, ridiculous moment. And it was one of the bigger laughs in the movie for me. And it's like the first time you see him kind of come alive. But Cult of Chucky is, it's both are small movies. Like Cult and Curse are both like one location movies. Curse takes place in a mansion. Cult takes place in a hospital, crazy institution place. So it's really smart for them to carry on this franchise with, keeping it small and keeping it basic. All the other movies were kind of just getting out there, and this one is out there, but they kind of establish where they are in the last one, so that when they get to the crazy in this one, and like they really just kind of shrug it off. Like, so you know the scene in Looper where they debate time travel, and he's like, look, we can't sit here and debate this because we'll just both go crazy. Like, that's their way of throwing off time travel, is like, look, don't worry about it, just enjoy the movie. This movie has a similar scene where it's like, hey, how does he transfer his soul into other bodies? And he's like, yeah, I found a new spell on voodooForDummies.com. And you're just like, oh, okay, like, that's this movie, and, like, that's all I need. Like, fair enough. This is stupid, but I'm along for the ride. So, yeah, it's definitely taking itself less seriously than the last one, but it's still just as fun, just as entertaining. I highly recommend watching both of them and watching them in order. I do think Curse is a better movie, but Cult is really good, really entertaining. A little more spoiler talk here, talk about the ending. Again, it ends on a down note. Like, they're really good, and they definitely set up a sequel, but Chucky kind of wins in these two movies. He doesn't kill the main character in the first movie, but in this one, he ends up putting his soul in her body, and then she ends up, since it kind of dives into the thing of like, oh, can a paraplegic person walk if their brain thinks they can, and blah, blah, blah. So since he puts his soul in her body, she's able to walk again, even though, science might not say that would work. But, you kind of buy into it for what that movie is. And it ends with her now as Chucky and Tiffany being driving off into the sunset, as it were. Andy does show up at the hospital, and there's a great moment. So he ships a doll there and like has its hair cut, and I assume that's so I actually did not see this coming. So at one point he pulls out a doll, and the Chucky head at his place is like, oh, what's that for? And he sends it to the hospital, and I didn't realize it was him, but then he goes to the hospital and he's like, I need to see Nica because he knows what's going on. He's seeing kind of what's going on in the news, and so he gets himself committed, and they lock him up, knowing that Chucky's going to come after him. And luckily it's the Chucky doll that he had shipped there, which was great because they talk about how Andy's there and there's the three Chuckies arguing, and they're like, oh man, who gets to kill Andy? And one's like, I had my hand melted or whatever, and the one who has his hair cut, like, hey, look at my hair. Like, oh yeah, right, man, you're right, you go kill him, like, you earned it. Which was, again, kind of a funny moment. Like, I thought it was a joke, but no, they really think he earned it because of his haircut. So yeah, they go to kill it, or he goes to kill Andy. And it turns out that Andy hid a gun inside of him. So he, like, reaches into his stomach and pulls out a gun. For some stupid reason, he packed a gun with the smallest amount of bullets, just like a Walther PPK, like the gun James Bond uses. And he, like, immediately runs out of bullets, and there's two more Chuckies. And he just gets locked in this room. So he kills one of the dolls and doesn't actually, like, contribute to anything. But, this movie was really great. It was really fun. It was really silly. I highly recommend it. I highly recommend watching both of them and watch them in order, because it is literally like right after the other. Like, you should, and they're both great. They're both worth watching. So that's going to be it for today's Shocktober episode and the end of our two-parter where we talk about the 2 recent Chucky movies. Highly recommend them. Check them out. And thank you for listening.